Hello and welcome to Take on Tech. This is your number one tech show because we always endeavor to keep you updated on all matters technology. Today we have an all-packed up show for you. In Tech Talk, we'll be focusing on the unique digital identifier. We give you all the information that you need to know about it. But before that, we have tech news both locally and internationally, and also an interesting Tech of the Week. So you are rightly tuned in. The hashtag to use is Take on Tech at KBC Channel 1. My name is Stephanie Ayieta. And before we get to the tech news, let's have the question of the day.
I've not had it. One, I try to be anonymous on the internet, and two, I try to create complicated passwords, mostly for my accounts. Yeah, it's
being hacked, no, but I've had experiences of people being hacked. Yeah, where their Facebook accounts, Instagram are hacked. Yeah, people asking for money, people putting out these pornographic materials on their accounts. Yeah, and leading them to very maneno mob tu manze.
Yes, I've been hacked like several times, especially my Facebook account. Yes, like I've encountered like people are borrowing money, then like some of my friends know that I'm the one that is borrowing money, so somehow that feeling is not quite good.
Oh, yeah. If yes, what is your experience?
I think the experience was losing my account, my Instagram account. Yeah, so and I couldn't access it.
In tech news, Konza Smart City now gets boost from the South Korean government. And internationally, the famous ChatGPT now has a successor, that is ChatGPT-4, the latest version of the AI chatbox. More on this in our tech news roundup. Kenya and South Korean governments have launched 4 economic innovation partnership program initiatives that aim to accelerate the progress of Konza Technopolis project. Intelligent transport system is the use of advanced technologies to various modes of transports, including roadways, railways, airways, and waterways to improve safety, efficiency, and sustainability. The system integrates various technologies such as sensors, communication networks, and data analytics to provide real-time information to travelers, operators, and authorities, which enables them to make more informed decisions. The implementation of the 2022-2023 Economic Innovation Partnership Program between Kenya and Korea will be carried out by the Korea Trade Investment and Promotion Agency and KOTDA on behalf of the Korean and Kenyan government, respectively. This launch of the second year's Economic Innovation Partnership Program, EIPP, comes after the implementation of the initial EIPP projects in March 2022, which consisted of developing the Smart City Master Plan, performing a feasibility study on the Integrated Control Center, focusing on security operations, and setting up a transport network and smart mobility plans that align with the city's urban functions. AI has released GPT-4. The new model can respond to images, providing recipe suggestions for photos of ingredients, for example, as well as writing captions and descriptions. It can also process up to 25,000 words, about 8 times as many as ChatGPT. ChatGPT answers questions using natural human-like language, and it can also mimic other writing styles such as songwriters and authors using the internet, as it was in 2021 as its knowledge database. OpenAI said it had spent 6 months on safety features for GPT-4 and had trained it on human feedback. However, it warned that it may still be prone to sharing disinformation. GPT-4 will initially be available to ChatGPT Plus subscribers who pay $20 per month for premium access to the service. It's already powering Microsoft Bing service engine platform. The tech giant has invested $10 billion into OpenAI. GPT-4, like ChatGPT, is a type of generative artificial intelligence. Generative AI uses algorithms and predictive text to create new content based on prompts. GPT-4 has more advanced reasoning skills than ChatGPT. The model can, for example, find available meeting times for 3 schedules. However, like its predecessors, OpenAI has warned that GPT-4 is still not fully reliable and may hallucinate, a phenomenon where AI invents facts or makes reasoning errors. In a world where many countries are struggling with high fuel prices, we are looking into a future where plastic waste could become a useful fuel source. So what is technology doing about this? That is what we have for you in our Tech of the Week. Let's have a look. Worldwide, more than 400 million tons of plastic is produced every year, roughly the same weight as all of humanity. Today, around 85% ends up in landfill or is lost to the environment, where it will stay for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. The race is on to find the best way to break those chemical bonds and reclaim the Earth's precious resources locked into plastic. According to the professor of energy and sustainability at the University of Cambridge, effectively, plastic is another form of fossil fuel. It's rich in energy and in chemical composition, which they want to unlock. But the chemical bonds that make up plastic are still made to last, and of 7 billion tons ever created, less than 10% has been recycled. A new solar-powered system shows the way forward to recycling chemical in an environment-friendly way. Professor Arwin Reisner and his team have developed a process that can convert 2 waste streams, that is plastic and CO2, into 2 chemical products at the same time, all powered by sunlight. The technology transforms CO2 and plastic into syngas, the key components of sustainable fuels such as hydrogen. It also produces glycolic acid, which is widely used in the cosmetic industry. The system works by integrating catalysts, chemical compounds, which accelerate chemical reaction into a light absorber. Professor Reisner says the process works at room temperature and room pressure, and reactions run automatically when you expose it to sunlight. Nothing is needed. He assures that the process produces no harmful waste. Other solar-powered technologies hold promise for tackling plastic pollution and CO2 conversion, but this is the first time they have been combined in a single process. In addition, this system can handle otherwise unrecyclable plastic waste. For Tech Talk, we now join Grace Githaiga, who has been joined by the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, Mr. Irungu Houghton, to talk about the digital identity in Kenya that is to be introduced by the government in order for citizens to easily access government services. And where exactly did the Huduma number go? We have all this in the interview segment. Let's listen in.
Welcome to the interview section of Take on Tech, a weekly program that brings you technological concepts and debates and breaks them down in an untech way. Now, we know that the government has decided to register to give every individual a unique digital identifier. And this is the plan for 2023. We remember the President has given the Ministry of ICT and Digital Economy a directive to ensure that every person has a unique identifier in order to be able to access government services and other online services. In today's program, we are going to be speaking to Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya.
Thank you very much, Grace. It's great to be on Take on Take. the rollout of digital identifier and also the digitization of services is probably one of the biggest projects that the government of Kenya has ever rolled out. I think we have to look at it in the historical context. Before independence, we had the Kipande, we had the pass, the movement pass that would restrict movement across different parts of Kenya. We then, of course, then had the national ID, and that has served us essentially for about over 50 years, 60 years actually. And now we have the potential of a new instrument that will essentially register us as Kenyans. And I think there's not a more interesting time to be a Kenyan or to be a digital citizen than now. In some ways, we are leading into a new digital dawn, a new period in which everything changes forever. And we know that, for example, that digitization and e-commerce has changed the way that we do everything. It has changed the ways that families interact with each other, whether they have Zoom meetings or they have Facebook or WhatsApp group, SMS groups. But it's also changed the nature of our work. Whether you are Mama Mboga, whether you are the executive director of Amnesty International or the director of Safaricom, your life has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And mobile money has changed the way that we transact in the marketplace. For us as human rights defenders, we've had to learn a whole new language around the right to privacy, the data governance and digital rights. And in many ways, there are limitless possibilities now in terms of, for example, just big data. It is now possible to be able to understand what's happening in a country in real time. And that, I think, is the period that we're leaning into. And it is for that reason we really have to be careful as we move into the digitization program, that our rights as data subjects, as we now call it, people who produce data, that our rights are protected, and that government agencies, private companies do not use our data, do not sell our data without our permission. So informed and prior consent is very important. So one of the things that we have to look to the government at this time to do is to essentially ensure that every service that is digitized is preceded by a data protection impact assessment. This will essentially say and clarify for the government how much data do they require, what's going to happen to that data once it is stopped being used. Is there an opportunity for us to remove ourselves from the databases should we want to do that? So that's the first thing, data protection impact assessments. The second area really relates to how do government services and government agencies share our data. So if I register, for example, for NHIF, and my data is captured at that level, is it shared with KRA? And if it is shared with KRA, do I have the opportunity to declare that I don't want it shared with KRA? Because ultimately, my information is my information. It can't be shared without my consent. So these are two very important areas that the government must not forget as they move to digitize 5,000 services by the end of the year. So many viewers probably remember the Huduma number exercise that took place over 2019-2020. There were a number of problems with that exercise. The first was that there was no legal framework when they started collecting information. Many organizations, including Amnesty, pushed for the enactment of the Data Protection Act 2019. That has now happened. But there was no legal framework when they were doing this, and it was very dangerous because of that. The second thing most people will remember is that there was an attempt to argue publicly by the government that they would deny services to anybody who did not register with Huduma number. And we reminded the government that that was not only illegal, but it was immoral, that you cannot deny services to Kenyans that are enshrined in our constitution and are also part of your manifesto as a national administration or as 47 counties. The third thing was that the Huduma number was not subjected to a data protection impact assessment. Assessments are essentially there to ensure that the people who are collecting data think very carefully and can demonstrate that they will take care of the data, that the data will not be sold to third parties without our consent, that there is actually a purpose and a framework within which they will store that data. And Huduma number did not go through a data impact assessment, and that's primarily why it collapsed. It collapsed because Katiba Institute and a number of other human rights organizations went to court and said, until you have done a data protection impact assessment, you have no business collecting our data. And the courts essentially stopped the Huduma number initiative. Now, it's unclear what has actually happened. Obviously, many people, it's not clear how many people, but government talked about several million people went and registered for Huduma number. And for those of you who did, you remember there were there were no less than 15 to 20 questions that you asked, some of which, for those of us who looked at it as data governance experts, we were very concerned that the government seemed to have been on an exercise to just collect data rather than essentially register people into a unique identifying number. But we would probably argue that the data that has been collected has still not gone through a data protection impact assessment, and therefore the government, before it uses that data, needs to be able to complete that exercise. But I think from what we heard from the Kenya Kwanza State Department on immigration and citizen services is that they do not plan to proceed with the Huduma number. They plan essentially to move in a different direction.
Take on Tech takes a short break. We are talking to Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. And we're talking about the digital identification, the need to have a unique identifier for every Kenyan. Please continue following us on all our social media handles, and that's at KBC Channel 1. Welcome back to the interview section of Take on Tech, in which we are discussing the digital identification in Kenya with Irungu Houghton, who is the Executive Director of Amnesty International. Now, Irungu, just a quick question. I just need to take you back on the question of Huduma number. What happens to all the Huduma cards that people hold? Should they throw them away?
For those people who took their Huduma cards, I think they must demand clarity from the government. What's the value of those Huduma cards? Will the government continue to pursue that program? Or should they essentially hang them up somewhere and just remember that moment where government had an idea and was unable to fulfill on that idea? So I think it's really for the government to tell the citizens who essentially secured their Huduma cards. I didn't take a Huduma card on principle. I do believe in big data. I do believe in the importance of government being able to use data as evidence for policy making. It's just so important. But I just didn't feel that there was goodwill in the Huduma number program, particularly for me to feel confident that my data would be protected. So there are a number of us who essentially just didn't take those cards. I have to say that the intention is a bold intention. It's a good intention, and the idea that you have a single identification number or a way of identifying you is actually beneficial to the country. There is just so much corruption that comes from ghost workers, ghost students, ghost patients. In fact, at one point, I think I remember the Ministry of Immigration telling me that part of what Huduma was designed to deal with was even the case of men claiming maternity benefits, pretending that they too were pregnant. So I think the important thing about Huduma, which we must not lose, was this idea that if you had a clear identification number, you would be able to root out all these fraudulent, costly, cases of corruption that happen across our services. And I think that's the hope that we have with the Kenya Kwanza commitment to digitize so many services. I know last week, for example, unfortunately, our family were bereaved, and we had to facilitate for a family member to come from the UK. And it was very easy to get a visa for somebody who needed it, simply because that system has now been digitized. So it should lead to faster services, more accurate services, and less corruption. And I think that's what we must remind the government, that that's the promise of the digitization. The promise is essentially that we will have services that work and that are efficient and really are not open to wastage and corruption. There are a number of risks at a moment like this, and risks come with ambition. So we can start by saying that we can support and applaud the idea of digitizing services, and the prospects, I think, for corruption elimination is really great. But there are some risks, and I think the first risk takes us back to that four-letter word, Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA. Making sure that DPIAs are done on all of them, and they're not nice to do's, they're actually legal requirements. So the government will find itself back in the situation of the Jubilee administration if it doesn't do the DPIAs. But rather than just see them as legal requirements, they are professional ways of ensuring that as you set up the systems are there and have the right kind of checks and balances to ensure that people's personal data, personal information are not abused. But secondly, also that you are able to manage big data effectively. The second area really relates to public participation. One of the other concerns about the Huduma number, which came from a number of organizations, including a network known as the Namati network, was that persons that had been historically marginalized, people like, for example, the Nubian community, the Shonas, the Ogieks, and people who have really struggled to get either birth certificates or national IDs. And for that matter, of course, the entire Somali community always has a different experience when their children go to claim for, to register for a national ID, was to make sure that these historically marginalized communities are included in this new phase. And this would be the most exciting part of the new process of focusing on the birth certificate, which is the direction of travel that the government is now proposing, is that the number that you get, the registration number you get at your birth, will be a lifetime number. It will be the number that will be used throughout the different systems. So as you register for NHIF, you will use that. As you register to vote, you will use that. And therefore, it will be much more difficult, theoretically, for people to be able to manipulate and to exclude you from services. But it's really important that at the point at which the birth certificates are being given out, that everybody has the right to a birth, to an identity, to a birth certificate. So if they get that right, then everything should follow logically from that. As we lean into this dawn of a new digital era, I think citizens' awareness is very important. Too many of us download apps on our phones without understanding the permissions. And what we have to understand is that we are licensing people. Every time we download and give approval or permission for an app to operate on our phones or on our laptops or on any other digital device, we are essentially giving licenses to people. So it is important to read the data privacy guidelines. Many of the apps that we use actually sell our data to others. Now, you may think that's not a problem because I don't know how to sell the data myself. But just consider that when that information gets into the wrong hands, you can even find that your bank account or your identity can be fraudulently accepted. One of the things that we now know is dangerous to do and risky to do is to buy second-hand phones because with that phone comes a history, and sometimes that history has been, is part of a criminal scene, right? So you can even have a crime scene show up and you be arrested essentially for buying a second-hand phone that had been stolen from somebody else. And as the law, the law has not changed even if we have moved from analog to digital. Ignorance is not an excuse when you break the law. So it's very important that people understand how powerful digital devices are in our lives. The third one really is to respect each other and to respect the importance of people's dignity, and really not using these digital devices or the social media platforms as a way of abusing each other. And increasingly now we are seeing people being arrested for either lying to people and texting people and saying, I've taken your services, I'll pay you back, and then you don't, that itself is evidence, and people have been convicted on the basis of that. But even the posts that we use on social media, that we are now legally liable for those posts. And then I think the last thing that people need to be a bit more aware of is to understand the law and how the law protects them as data subjects. I think, even as I say that, I'm sure KBC listeners are wondering, kwani miyama, a data subject? What that means very simply is that you have information that is of value. And that information is yours, and it cannot be sold or exchanged without your permission. So I think that is very important. I think very basic things that people can do, for example, is to be more careful who they give their data to. You go to buildings and people ask you for your ID, they ask you for your telephone number, they ask you for your full names. The first thing I do in those situations is ask them, do you have a data protection policy? And if they don't have a data protection policy, I decline to give that information. And I think that's one of the things that we can do more of in future. And then the other one, to recognize that data, for some people, data means bundles. No, data is much more important than bundles. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think we have a number of things happening at the same time. You have conflicting laws, and the Data Protection Act is no more than 3 years old now. The Data Protection Commissioner has been very clear on a number of cases that citizens have to be more careful about what data they give. We've seen, for example, many Kenyans found themselves in the database, or rather in the membership database of political parties. I also myself found myself in a political party that I'd never registered for, and I asked them, how do you do this? They said, well, we just collected books from different apartments and different buildings, and we registered. And I said, I could actually bring your party to a halt by suing you. And I think what companies and businesses and apartment buildings and security companies need to be clear about is that they can be sued by any one person who is able to demonstrate to a court of law that when they signed in that book, that information was taken somewhere else. And I think the liability now is quite high. It will end in millions of fines. And we've started to see, I think, 2 or 3 cases now where citizens are taking people who have collected their data to court, and they are suing them for millions of shillings. So it could be the biggest money earner for citizens if the companies do not style up. And that's why I think it's so important for each person, each institution that is collecting data to do for themselves a data protection impact assessment. So it's not just for big companies, but it's even for buildings and security companies. Because if they do not do that, they can find themselves on the wrong end of the law, and it will be very costly.
A call to action. Just listening to Irungu Houghton, the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, 2 things emerge. One, as a citizen of this country, you need to start understanding what are your data protection rights. Get yourself out there, learn. Information is available. 2, for all organizations and companies, and especially those that are handling data, you need to do a data impact assessment. What is it? Again, all that information is available. So thank you so much, Irungu Houghton, for gracing Take on Tech. That's it from our interview section. Please continue watching. My name is Grace Githaiga.
We have now come to the end of the show, but as you know, we continue with the conversation. And today's question, we are asking you, what is your understanding of the digital identifier? Talk to us using the hashtag TakeOnTech as KBC Channel 1. You can also converse with me at Stephanie Ayieta across all my social media handles. We meet next week, same time, same place. Until then, let's keep it tech. Adios.